on food supply and food policy to order. The topics of food supply and food policy are of paramount importance to every resident of our Commonwealth. Access to safe, nutritious, and affordable food is a fundamental need, and the policies that shape our food system have far-reaching impacts on our health, our economy, our environment, and the overall well-being of our communities. Our purpose is to gather testimony, insights, and recommendations that will help inform our understanding and guide future actions and potential policy considerations. We want to understand the challenges we face, identify opportunities of improvement, and work collaboratively towards a more resilient, equitable, and sustainable food future for all Pennsylvanians. We have several individuals scheduled to speak today, and we appreciate everyone who has taken time to prepare testimony and be here. We ask all participants to be respectful of the differing viewpoints and to summarize their remarks to ensure everyone has a chance to be heard. Please keep your remarks under 5 minutes due to time constraints. We have to leave here about 10 a.m. Also, as this is an informational meeting, specific pieces of legislation are not to be discussed as part of your oral remarks. Your input is invaluable, and we are committed to considering all the information shared here today. Thank you all for your participation in this process. Chairman Metzger?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I look forward to the testimony today. Food safety and the health of our nation is a national security issue, and this is of utmost importance to us, and I'm thankful to the chairman for having the meeting today and look forward to all the testimony.
I would ask all members to hold your questions until the conclusion of the testimony. Panel 1, you're up. You can decide who goes first. Welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Scott Faber, and I'm the Senior Vice President for Government Affairs for the Environmental Working Group. I also teach food and farm law at Georgetown University Law Center. And prior to joining EWG, I was the Vice President for Federal Affairs for the Consumer Brands Association. While I'll be focusing my testimony today on bills to address food chemicals and ultra-processed foods, I want to share my support for all of the bills in the Healthy PA package. First, I'd like to share my support for efforts to limit food dyes from foods offered at school, and I'd like to make 4 main points about this. First of all, the overwhelming evidence shows that these dyes are making it harder for some of our kids to learn. In 2021, scientists produced an unprecedented study that looked at human evidence of what happens when kids eat dyes and looked at animal studies of what happens to their brains. And our scientists conclusively determined that some kids suffer from neurobehavioral effects and that these dyes are changing the structure of their brains and how their brains transmit signals. 2, the FDA has not thoroughly reviewed these dyes since the 60s, 70s, and 80s, long before toxicological studies could detect the effects on our kids' brains. 3, banning these colors will have no impact on our school food professionals. Relatively few of these foods are sold on the tray, that are sold in our schools on the tray or a la carte, contain these synthetic colors, and food companies can and do reformulate quickly. When other countries required a warning on foods containing these dyes, companies quickly replaced synthetic colors with natural colors. And finally, despite the harms described in the 2021 report, the FDA has no plans to reconsider the safety of these chemicals and is not required to do so, nor has the FDA reached an agreement with the food industry to phase out these dyes from school foods or from other foods sold in our stores. Other states are not waiting for the FDA or USDA to act. So far, Virginia, West Virginia, California, Utah, and Arizona have all banned these dyes from school foods, and more than 30 other states are actively considering similar legislation. Now, let me quickly turn to legislation to address ultra-processed foods, and particularly legislation to prohibit unhealthy ultra-processed foods from being sold in our schools. Processed foods are part of a healthy diet, and nothing in the legislative package, and that's the subject of this hearing, would prohibit schools from offering processed foods on the tray or a la carte. However, as you'll hear from Dr. Grega, the overwhelming scientific evidence shows that ultra-processed foods have been linked to serious health harms, including type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. Ultra-processed foods, or UPFs, are different from processed foods because they combine industrial ingredients and additives in ways that make our foods hyper-palatable. These industrially engineered foods are not simply delicious, they are irresistible because they change the signals that are sent to our brains in ways that trigger our brain's reward system, because they increase the speed with which that reward is delivered, and because they interfere with the signals that tell us to stop eating. Americans are among the world's biggest consumers of UPFs. More than half of the calories we consume come from UPFs, including 67% of the calories consumed by our children. Fortunately, many of our schools have already moved to eliminate unhealthy UPFs, replacing unhealthy UPFs with healthier processed foods and with whole foods from local Pennsylvania farmers. These schools have shown us that we do not need to make expensive changes to school kitchens to phase out unhealthy UPFs. Let me be clear that we are not proposing to phase out processed foods or even ultra-processed foods from our schools. We are simply proposing to phase out unhealthy, ultra-processed foods, and we know that our food companies can do it because they're already doing it in other school systems. And let me close by saying a few words about paraquat. I want to add my voice to those of you who today will be urging you to ban paraquat, which has been linked to Parkinson's disease and other health harms, including cancer. As I mentioned before, I teach food and farm law at Georgetown Law School, including pesticide law. And like many of you, I've also been personally impacted in my family by Parkinson's disease. So I just want to make 3 quick points before I close. First, paraquat has been banned in more than 70 countries, including China, Brazil, the European Union, Canada. And for example, almost 80% of the world's apples, 80% are grown in countries where paraquat has been banned. Second, paraquat is made in China, but is so toxic that even the Chinese government prohibits its use by Chinese farmers. Let me say that again. It's made in China, but it can't be used in China. Instead, the Chinese state-owned company that makes paraquat sells it to our farmers. And the last thing I'd like to say is paraquat only makes up about 1% of all the pesticides sprayed in Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania's farmers have plenty of other options to control weeds, including many other chemical alternatives. And with that, I will turn it to Dr. Grega.
Thank you very much. Move that over. Thank you. So as Scott said, I'm Dr. Megan Grega. I'm a family doc from the Lehigh Valley of Pennsylvania, and I'm also board certified in lifestyle medicine. I'm the co-founder and the chief medical officer of Kellen Foundation, which is a 501c3 nonprofit that's dedicated to improving health, longevity, and well-being through our Healthy Neighborhood Immersion strategy. Additionally, I serve on the governing boards of directors for the American College of Lifestyle Medicine and the American Board of Lifestyle Medicine. So thank you for allowing me this opportunity to testify on this very important topic. So despite spending approximately $4.9 trillion annually on healthcare, the U.S. continues to have epidemic levels of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancer, dementia, and other chronic disease, resulting in a life expectancy that is 3 years less than the average of our peer nations, and 7.5 years less than the longest lived country, which is Japan, who spends significantly less per capita on healthcare than we do. That's a lot of years of life that we are leaving on the table. The food we choose to eat and the beverages we drink are one of the most potent epigenetic levers that we have to manipulate to either improve or to damage our long-term health and vitality. Within our own country, Pennsylvania was ranked 28th overall among U.S. states in America's Health Rankings 2023 annual report, and unfortunately, we are 35th in the category of having a population with multiple chronic conditions. 33% of our adult populations meet the clinical criteria for obesity, as do 18% of our children in grades K through 12. We have a lot of room for improvement in regard to supporting long, healthy, and happy lives here in the Commonwealth. So people often think that nutrition recommendations are confusing and like always changing. But the truth is there's no confusion in the peer-reviewed scientific literature about what the main components of an optimal eating pattern entails. The clinical practice guidelines from organizations including the American Heart Association, the American Stroke Association, International Society of Hypertension, American College of Cardiology, American Diabetes Association, and the World Health Organization all agree. They recommend the same dietary pattern for optimal health, and that is basically to follow a low-sodium, high-potassium dietary pattern that includes consumption of ample servings of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and beans, and limiting the amounts of saturated fat, red meat, and processed red meat, and then processed foods that are containing added sugars, sodium, refined grains, and sugar-sweetened beverages. Now, a modeling study using data from the 2019 Global Burden of Disease report revealed that if we could switch to an optimal diet, which they defined as higher intakes of whole grains, there's those beans again, the legumes, fish, fruits, vegetables, and nuts, and decreased intake of red and processed meats, sugar-sweetened beverages, and refined grains versus our typical Western diet, if we could do that at age 20, women are expected to gain an additional 10.7 years of life expectancy. And for all you guys up there, you get 13. Now, even if you transition to an optimal diet at age 60, which as a doctor I would not recommend, but if you're gonna wait that long, you still get an additional 8 extra years of life expectancy. So ultra-processed foods, which is part of what we're talking about here today, they increase our risk of morbidity and mortality through 2 mechanisms, both from the impact of the food itself, but also, very importantly, from the loss of benefit from other more nutritious foods that they kind of replace and crowd out of our diet. Research from the Framingham Offspring Study revealed, and this is important, revealed that each daily serving of ultra-processed food increases our risk of cardiovascular mortality by 9%. So I'm hopeful that all of you will consider that statistic as you are picking your snacks later on this afternoon. Now, there are multiple studies in the peer-reviewed literature that reveal a similar pattern. A study evaluating over 72,000 participants that were age 55 and older in the UK Biobank dataset found that a 10% increase in ultra-processed food intake was associated with a 25% increase in the risk of dementia. Another recent study just published in April in the American Journal of Preventive Medicine estimated that ultra-processed food consumption was responsible for almost 124,000 premature deaths in the US every year. So one of the key dietary components that's critical for good health, but that's limited or missing in the ultra-processed food options is fiber. Fiber is instrumental in maintaining optimal gut health and supporting a thriving gut microbiome, which will produce short-chain fatty acids. And these are things that are integral to metabolic function, and they also have anti-inflammatory effects. So here's another good stat for you to take home. For every 10-gram increase in your daily fiber consumption, the risk of your all-cause mortality, so dying of anything, decreases by 10%. And eating 10 grams of fiber is not as onerous as it might sound. You can easily exceed that just at breakfast with a cup of cooked rolled oats with maybe some chia seeds and flaxseed, a little bit of berries on top, and some walnuts. Now, unfortunately, the daily fiber intake in Americans is approximately only 16 grams per day, which is woefully inadequate for optimal health. And ultra-processed foods, they don't assist us in achieving that fiber goal of at least 25 grams a day for women and at least 38 grams daily for adult men. Another key thing has to do with our weight maintenance, because fiber consumption is critical for satiety. Dr. Kevin Hall's group at the NIH provided some really striking evidence that healthy, previously weight-stable adults, when they were presented with a buffet and encouraged to eat all that they wanted to, when that buffet was ultra-processed, they ate approximately 500 calories more a day before they felt full, compared to when it was a more minimally processed diet. They also gained an average of 2 pounds during the 2 weeks that they were fed the ultra-processed diet. So these ultra-processed foods interfere with our satiety mechanisms, and it's just very easy to eat more than our body needs. Ultra-processed foods are ubiquitous in our environment, and they account for over 50% of the calories that we consume, with even higher levels of consumption in children, reaching about 67% of the children's calories, according to a recent study from Tufts. So like 2/3 of what our kids are eating is not giving them the nutrition that they need. These foods are hyperpalatable, and they activate the same dopaminergic pathways that underlie addictive behavior. And what is also concerning is that visual cues of the hyperpalatable food, so either a picture or a video, has a very similar neural effect to exposure to the food itself. So marketing messages that promote ultra-processed foods can easily lead to craving of those foods and then increase consumption as the logical result. Social nudges and the impact of choice architecture, which comprises basically the default option of the places that we live, work, and play, have a really big role in the food choices we make. Research that explores the variation in life expectancy and chronic disease prevalence between diverse populations has demonstrated that our zip code is more relevant than our genetic code in regard to the length and the quality of a person's life. So I just want to repeat that. Where you live matters more than the DNA in your cells as far as your outcome, as how long and how well and how healthy you live. There's a metric called the Retail Food Environment Index, or the RFEI, that's a very useful metric to assess the number and the variety of food outlets in a neighborhood. And basically, to calculate it, you divide the number of fast food restaurants and convenience stores by the number of grocery stores, produce vendors, farmers markets, things like that, within a given radius of a neighborhood. And what I think is important for all of us to understand is that a higher RFEI, so what type of food we're surrounded by, is indicative of a greater density of food outlets that traditionally lack those healthy options. And living in a community with a higher RFEI increases the risk of chronic diseases such as diabetes, hypertension, and obesity, regardless of your socioeconomic demographics. The food environment we're surrounded by makes a huge impact on the dietary pattern that all of us are likely to follow. So in closing, Albert Einstein once said that we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. In regard to healthy lifestyle choices, there is no lack of information. There's lack of implementation, and that's what this package is all about. So it is imperative that Pennsylvania devises collective solutions to support making healthy food choices in our schools, our workplaces, and our communities. So I urge you to support the Healthy PA package of legislation, because it's going to help shift our surrounding choice architecture and help us make the healthy choice the easy choice in Pennsylvania. So I look forward to any questions that you may have.
Good morning, and I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you. My name's Tom Neltner. I'm with a group called Unleaded Kids, but for the past 15 years, I've worked on the food additive regulatory system and understanding how do chemicals get approved for use in food. I'm here to tell you that the U.S. food additive regulatory program is fundamentally broken. Your Healthy Pennsylvania package starts to fill some of those gaps in ways that we can't expect from the federal government. And having the state action is important. It won't solve all the actions. A little bit about my background. I'm a little on the unusual side. I'm a chemical engineer and an attorney. I made pesticides. I made food additives in Kentucky. Back in Indiana, where I'm from, I made insulin. I made animal antibiotics. I make the chemicals. After that, I worked for small businesses. I am a huge fan of small businesses, and we help them on chemical safety to protect the workers. Over the years, I migrated to housing. Healthy housing is so important, and I realized that what a threat that was to kids. In 2010, I always trusted that the food additive regulatory system, or how food chemicals were approved, was going to function. In 2010, I realized it doesn't, and it's because of a loophole called generally recognized as safe. It's just words that were written into a 1958 law that Congress put in that said if it's generally recognized as safe because of past use or scientific procedures, it's going to be fine. What they didn't realize is that FDA would implement it in a way that lets companies self-certify that it's GRAS and never tell the public or FDA. The underlying science may or may not be generally published or recognized, but the agency doesn't know what's actually going into food. In late 1990s, they set up a voluntary notification system that says to companies, please, please, please tell us what it is. But companies can continue doing it in secret without telling anybody, the public or FDA, what chemicals are going into food. We did an analysis. About 10,000 food chemicals are used in food or food contact materials, about half and half. About 1,000 of those FDA had never reviewed for safety. Let me give you a quote from one of the FOIA responses that we got from one of the notices that was submitted to the agency voluntarily. When the agency raised questions, the company removed it and continued to market and sell it for use in food. And when the company said, wait a second, you're raising questions, I can just withdraw it and put it on the market, the FDA scientist said in writing, we cannot require anything, as this is a voluntary program and we don't want to frighten anyone away. What your proposals do is address one of the, and the agency asks tough questions, withdraw it and continue putting it in food and in the market. That just undermines the integrity of the whole system. Think about it if you're an FDA scientist and you ask the tough questions, yet you have to tell the person, you can go ahead and make your own decisions in secret, and we'll try, and we could go after you if we wanted to, but nobody has the time to do that. The food additive, that GRAS loophole, needs to be closed by making it more transparent so companies have to tell FDA. Well, you guys can't have it tell FDA, but one of the bills says you have to tell the state, and that kind of transparency is going to change the industry so the whole system starts to work. Second, the safety standard for new and existing chemicals is a reasonable certainty of no harm, and it can't be found to induce cancer. The reasonable certainty of no harm. As a practical matter, FDA tries to do that on new chemicals because if it doesn't, they're on the market. Because it knows that once they're on the market, it's really tough to pull them. When it comes to chemicals that are on the market like BHA or brominated vegetable oils or the synthetic dyes, FDA implicitly shifts the safety standards so that the company or the advocate or the agency has to show that it's actually causing harm. So instead of a reasonable certainty of no harm, a presumption against it, it becomes you have to prove it's harmful, which is a really tough test to do. What the Healthy Pennsylvania package does is goes after the chemicals where it's already been shown. It raises questions about BHA, the synthetic dyes. Well, we've got it. I tried to work the FDA system. I submitted at least 10 food additive packages, which is what the industry does, presenting the entire science. The statute says FDA has 6 months to make a final decision, and they've only made a decision on 3 of those. Many of those are about all the chemicals that are in our food and we're exposed to. The third breakdown is in that definition of reasonable certainty of no harm, the agency has to consider the cumulative effect of all these related substances in our diet. It can't go one chemical by one chemical by one chemical, because that's not how we eat food. It's the whole package. So by raising the questions about unhealthy, ultra-processed food, it gets at the shortcoming of the agency. I have looked at thousands of decisions. The agency has never actually considered the cumulative effect of all these chemicals in the diet. It is what we think of as ultra-processed food. It's not one ingredient in ultra-processed food. It's the combination. It's the emulsifiers that allow water and oil to stay mixed in your salad dressing. It's the thickener that can irritate your gut. And when you irritate the gut and cause inflammation, other chemicals are more likely to pass. Our toxicology system isn't prepared to look at chemicals in combination. But our bodies, our health is dependent on FDA doing its job and looking at the cumulative effect of those chemicals in our diet. By fixing the GRAS loophole, by requiring some transparency to the process, you create the dynamic to address it. You get the worst of the existing chemicals, start to get them off the market, and that state action starts to drive FDA to act. And by looking at unhealthy ultra-processed foods and at least getting it out of our school foods, we start the process of doing what Congress said FDA should do in 1958, and that's look at the cumulative effect of all these foods in our diet. Thank you.
Chairman Burgos, Chairman Metzger, and members of the committee, thank you so much for this opportunity to speak to you today. First, I want to thank you for investing your time in learning about the state of Pennsylvania's food system. It's really important that you do. Before I begin, I want to state clearly that the vast majority of Pennsylvania farmers, whether they're organic or conventional, want to protect the environment, their communities, and their neighbors. Farmers are not the villains here. They are some of the hardest working people in America, and without them, we would not be fed as a nation. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania has a long history of leading the nation and improving the health of our food supply, starting with contributing to the scientific data that led to the USDA certified organic standard in 1990. Rodale Institute, the 78-year-old nonprofit based in Kutztown, Pennsylvania, where I serve as CEO, is the author of that research. Pennsylvania also holds the distinct honor of ranking third in the United States in the sale of organic products, which is really good for our economy here in the Commonwealth, a symbol that the Commonwealth's leadership in the sector that expanded Americans' access to healthy, chemical-free food for decades. As this committee undertakes the task of evaluating legislation that addresses hazardous pest practices in the agricultural and food production industries, it's imperative to understand the difference in organic and conventional production methods and the well-documented risks associated with agriculture chemical exposures. First, I'll start with the farming methods. It's critical to understand that conventional farming relies heavily on chemical intervention, whether it's synthetic pesticides, herbicides, and fertilizers, to fight pests, weeds, and to provide plants with nutrition. Chemicals commonly used in conventional production are widely believed to be endocrine disruptors with the potential to cause cancer in humans. Excessive nitrates from chemical fertilizers can wash into the waterways, threatening public health and causing blue baby syndrome in infants exposed to contaminated drinking water, along with many other unintended consequences. Another widely recognized risk factor associated with conventional farming is the excessive use of antibiotics in livestock management, which contributes heavily to antibiotic resistance in humans. In stark contrast stands regenerative organic agriculture, which eliminates the threat of toxic chemicals and antibiotics from our food systems and improves the soil health for stronger, healthier, and more resilient crops. Rodale Institute's long-term research demonstrates that soil health and water quality can be improved while maintaining crop production without the use of any harmful chemicals, all while making the farmer more profitable. These methods largely include diversified crop rotations, cover crops, compost, and reducing tillage. Cover crops have many other benefits, which include reducing erosion, improving water infiltration, and reducing weed pressure. Healthy soil also contributes to healthy gut microbiomes in humans. A report published by the World Economic Forum found that soil and the human gut contain approximately the same number of active microorganisms, but that urbanized societies have seen a huge reduction in gut microbiome diversity. Research suggests that this disruption in human gut microbiome diversity could be attributed to causes of autoimmune disorders and other chronic illnesses. Members of the committee may be surprised to learn that, in fact, plant roots actually resemble human guts. In the soil, plant roots are surrounded by a community of microorganisms like bacteria, fungi, worms, and other living microorganisms within plant roots. They help the plant to grow, to absorb nutrients, and protect the plant from disease. In our bodies, our guts contain trillions of microbes like bacteria, fungi, and other organisms living in the gut and on the body. They help us to digest food, absorb nutrients, and protect us from disease. Plant roots and our gut function in very similar ways. They need the right amount of water, oxygen, and pH balance in order to survive. They even need the same kind of bacteria. Our research director, Dr. Dario Forna, at Rodale's campus in Italy, suggests that soils are a major hub of biodiversity, and there's growing evidence that soil, plant roots, and human gut microbiome are all connected in similar ways. It's not surprising that plants have a big effect on our gut. In fact, up to 2 million bacteria can be found on a single gram of fresh produce. But this complex natural system is often disrupted by our industrial food system. As I referenced earlier, the chemicals used as part of modern agriculture are suspected to have numerous exposed risks to people. I've outlined many of those examples in my written testimony, and I'll list just a few of them now. According to reports and studies, we have found that 4 times more glyphosate, a commonly used herbicide, is detected more in children than in adults. Behavioral health impacts were found in children who consume synthetic food dyes. Prenatal exposure to glyphosate in pregnant women is linked to endocrine disruption in unborn girls. Children who live near locations of heavy glyphosate application are way more likely to develop metabolic disorders. Certain pesticide exposures in agriculture workers have been associated with elevated cancer risk, especially prostate cancer. Pesticide exposure in agriculture workers have associated with increased rates of ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. As it specifically relates to paraquat, the subject of our legislation today, recent preliminary findings from California's Department of Pesticide Regulation also found a potential association between paraquat exposure and thyroid impacts and birth defects. In Pennsylvania, about half of all paraquat used is in 6 counties: Adams, York, Lancaster, Franklin, Cumberland, and Berks. And between 2014 and 2018, paraquat made up just 1.3% of all pesticide use in the state. So it's important to note that paraquat use has likely fallen since farmers began using this new Enlist and Liberty soybeans, which is a genetically modified soybean which are designed to work with a different herbicide. The population with the greatest exposure to conventional agricultural chemicals, and therefore the greatest risk of associated diseases, is our farming communities. Farmers and farm workers routinely handle these chemicals, and the communities in which they operate are based, largely which are rural, have populations that are regularly exposed to these chemicals after application. The exposure risks to both the consumer and farming populations are well documented and warrant responsible, reasonable action from our policymakers. And critically, American farmers in the organic sector have proven that these hazardous substances are simply unnecessary to produce food in a profitable way. The legislation introduced as part of the Healthy PA package symbolizes a remarkable shift by the state to ensure that consumers are informed and protected from unwanted and unintended agriculture or food additive chemical exposure. Consumers, farmers, and farm workers would greatly benefit if the Healthy PA package of bills were passed by the legislature. Thank you for your time today.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to share my story. I want to especially thank Chairs Representative Burgos and Representative Metzger, as well as Representative Mihalik for inviting me. Thank you to my fellow panelists and the Environmental Working Group and the Michael J. Fox Foundation who invited me to be here today. My name is Meg Ringler, and I have had the wonderful opportunity to be a volunteer legislative advocate for a number of years with the Fox Foundation. I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, House District 34, with my husband, Mike. Mike was diagnosed with young onset Parkinson's disease when he was just 49 years old, before I met him, actually. We have no way of knowing what the cause of his disease is, or if there is even a singular cause. But what I can tell you is he has no family history of the disease, but he did grow up in rural PA, close to the center of what is now known as the Parkinson's Belt. His father was stationed at Camp Lejeune before Mike was born, and during Mike's years working for the U.S. House Appropriations Committee, he traveled to many places with heavy pesticide and herbicide use. Here's a few other things we know. The evidence linking paraquat to Parkinson's disease is clear. Studies show that working in fields or living near fields where paraquat has been sprayed significantly increases the chance of developing Parkinson's disease. And people who live or work near fields where paraquat has been sprayed could be twice as likely to develop Parkinson's disease. One of the things I love about working with the Fox Foundation is they recognize Parkinson's does not only affect those living with the disease, but their friends and their family. On my drive out late last night, I was thinking about what a privilege it is to be asked to be here, to share this story. But it's also a privilege to be able to come, to have a steady job that allows me to take the day off and the resources to pay for travel. The cost of Parkinson's to care partners is not only emotional, but financial. Women who have caregiving responsibilities are estimated to lose several $100,000 in lost earnings and potential earnings throughout the course of their careers. Whenever I think about possible promotions, I wonder if I can balance those responsibilities with my care responsibilities. When I think about jobs that might take me to rural parts of our state, I think about the lack of availability of neurologists there. That means Parkinson's is not only affecting patients and families here in PA, but our overall economic prosperity and labor infrastructure. We're lucky that Mike is still able to work. His disease progression has been slow, but it's not a linear disease. And for us, the ending is written. As Michael J. Fox has often said, you don't die from Parkinson's, you die with it. But for most people, that's not pretty. While right now Mike's tremors are well controlled with medication and there are no signs of dyskinesia, his back pain is severe, and his low blood pressure means I am very good at telling if someone is about to pass out. At any time, the medication could start to cause hallucinations, and Parkinson's can very often lead to dementia. You could say it's the stuff of fairy tales, but the grim version, not the Disney ones. What this bill, this package, has the opportunity to do is to protect Pennsylvanians and rewrite their endings for them and for their families. Whether or not paraquat was a factor in Mike's diagnosis, for me, is irrelevant. We know it's a cause of Parkinson's for many, and that is enough. I am grateful to the sponsors of the bill that you two have decided enough is enough. Thank you for your time and for your efforts to make Pennsylvania safer for all of us.
Thank you. Now we'll move to questions from members. Representative Mihalik.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate you holding this hearing today to have this discussion on the Health EPA package. It's something that I'm very passionate about, a little obsessed with. I did want to thank my co-captain in this endeavor, Representative Schusterman, for her advocacy as well. But just really happy to have this discussion with my colleagues, learn more about the additives, the farming practices, and really what the health outcomes, how they're affected by all of it. I do have a question just, to open the panel. I think it's important to just have the discussion about the states not traditionally taking a role in this space. And we see a lot in mainstream media right now talking about Red 3 and brominated vegetable oil. Could you just comment on how this is playing out in other states and its relationship to the federal government, and then also on some of the specific things that have happened in the news recently?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So far, the FDA has not taken a single action to ban or restrict any of the chemicals of concern that we've talked about today. They've not initiated a rulemaking to restrict or ban the use of synthetic colors in foods, in school foods. They've not taken any action to address the shortcomings that Mr. Neltner identified. In particular, they've not taken a step to require food chemical companies to notify the FDA if they're bringing a new food chemical into commerce. They've not taken a step to look back and reconsider the safety of chemicals that have been linked to serious health harms or banned by our trading partners. So far, nothing has changed, and that's why states are continuing to ban food chemicals from food, as West Virginia did now about a month ago. They banned 9 chemicals from all foods sold in the state and banned synthetic colors from school foods. As Utah has done, they banned synthetic colors from all of school foods. As Virginia has done, they banned synthetic colors from all school foods. And many other states are still continuing to actively consider efforts to ban or restrict these chemicals because they see what you've seen, Rep. Mihalik, that despite promises, pledges, aspirations, so far, nothing has changed at FDA or USDA, which oversees the safety of our school foods.
So I've worked with FDA for a long time and tried to move them forward by submitting the petitions just the way industry does, just the way they wanted, all the science in a package so they could say yes. They still can't. Decisions are tough. I'm trying to be sympathetic for FDA, so let me explain to you what it's like to be there. They're on a treadmill. industry keeps coming to them with newer and newer food chemicals, more synthetic chemicals. They want that on the market yesterday. And if FDA doesn't act, those chemicals go on the market. So they're on the treadmill that keeps going faster and faster and faster. And so when you ask them to take a look at existing chemicals, it's at the very bottom of the pile. It's, if you've been on a treadmill that's going fast, if you take your eye off that panel, you know what's going to happen. You're going to fall flat on your face. And that's what they're worried about. So by states taking a lead when FDA can't or is unwilling, it's really important because it changes the dynamic, it gets their attention by shifting it away. And it's a traditional role of states. When the FDA or when the federal government drops the ball, states pick it up. And we've seen that over and over again, where leadership by the states provides the models. Let me give you a quick example. Lead in baby food. That was an issue that FDA identified in 2017. They didn't get standards out until January of this year, after all the promises. And they promised to get draft ones out for cadmium and arsenic. We still don't have those. This is lead in baby food, so they can't even get those basic things done. So we need states to take that leadership role. Thanks for asking.
Thank you. For the sake of time, Representative Warner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to be quick. So my interest in food dyes came to me when I realized that red dye number 3, right, was banned in cosmetics since 1990. And it wasn't until 2025 that it was banned from food. That to me seems like a major issue. And you highlighted in your testimony briefly about the FDA process. Explain to me explain how a chemical that we are not allowed to put on our skin was legal to be consumed in our food since 1990. Explain, and I know you're not the one responsible for it, but explain to me how that is possible in the United States of America.
It's the agency committing to do something and not following through, not having the vehicle, not having the priority. It's on that treadmill, so they just don't have the time. And when staff look around at all the things they have to do, red dye number 3, or BHA from a 1990 petition that's been pending for, 35 years, and they haven't resolved it when the statute says 6 months, they just, it falls off the radar.
Now, for sake of time, I don't mean to interrupt. As a chemical scientist, now red dye 3 was just banned from the FDA recently. Tell me the chemical difference in the other synthetic food dyes from red dye 3. To me as a layperson, I'm thinking synthetic food dye cannot be that remarkably different.
I'm not good on the chemistry of all the different dyes.
Okay.
Each one of them have a different source, either in coal or petroleum. So that's the synthetic part. And each one is different, but when you look at all those dyes together, they cause the behavioral problems that we see in kids that the science is now clear on. But FDA just didn't want to acknowledge it because they're always worried about getting sued by companies if they make a bad decision.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry. I have no faith in a system that has allowed something that we know was not healthy to consume, that we know was not healthy to put on our skin, and yet was legal for all this time. So I have no faith in these other food dyes, even if the FDA does tell me it's safe. And I believe somebody in their testimony said paraquat, it is manufactured in China, but is outlawed in China. Is that correct?
That's right.
Yeah, everybody needs to think about that because China is not exactly known for its renowned safety standards, yet it is banned there and used in the United States of America. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any additional questions for panel 1? Representative Borowitz? Borowski, sorry.
Good morning. Thank you so much. I'm Representative Borowski. I just have a question for you, and I'm sorry, I did not catch your name when you were testified.
Dr. Megan Grega.
Thank you so much, Dr. Grega, for being here, and all of you. Really appreciate that testimony. But I was very interested in some of the things that you said. So I worked at a hospital in a community where it was considered a food desert, so no supermarkets and things like that. And I was very interested with the
Healthy Neighborhood Immersion Strategy?
Yes, thank you. I've never heard that before, so I do appreciate that. But in your estimation, what would be the best kind of balance when it comes to accessibility for supermarkets and things like that with people to make sure that they're getting the healthy food that they need? What would be the best balance for that?
Well, food access is a challenge, obviously, throughout the entire country because, as we know, there's wonderful options in more of our suburban areas and maybe not as much in our rural and in our urban areas. But I think we need to look at a couple of different pieces. So there's the food access, which is, okay, now there's a grocery store there. Hopefully that has good options. But part of what, this is a capitalistic system. So you also have to have the demand from that community that actually would like to have the food. Now, we have found with the Eat Real Food Mobile Market, which is part of Kellen Foundation's intervention that we take out into areas of food insecurity and food deserts, the demand is there. But we have to make it more convenient, accessible, and we also have to make it affordable. And those are some of the things that there are policies in place about subsidizing. It's way cheaper to buy a child in school some of the subsidized breakfast cereals that are full of the chemicals that are being discussed today about being removed from schools than it is to maybe have staff in the kitchen that can cook that oatmeal that I was just talking about and throwing the berries on top of it. So when I look at the whole issue, it's multifactorial where we should be working on it. We should be making it easier and more accessible for people to be able to eat the foods that are going to be most nourishing for their health. That's going to save us money in the long run as far as from their chronic diseases, and it's also going to help with things like their attention span in school or their ability to just do their jobs and presenteeism, all those things. So we have to look at the access piece, but we also have to make the social norms change a little bit. I would ask all of you to think about the last time you were at a high school football game. What options were there for dinner at the high school football game? Probably not a whole lot of the things that are going to be the healthiest for your body. So if we start to shift what is available around people, they're more likely to actually choose the healthy option. So I'll give you an example from our soccer days. When I started bringing pots of chili and pots of vegetable soup to the soccer booster thing when my son was a captain of a soccer team, it sold out. So in a lot of places, the food is just not available. So our ability to help get the ultra-processed food out of the schools and bring in more of the things that will meet, and as Scott mentioned, it's not that we're getting rid of all ultra-processed foods, it's just the ones that don't meet the criteria of being a healthy version of it. There's plenty of opportunity for that. We just have to take the political will to do so.
Thank you, panel one. At this time, we'll ask panel two to please come up. Panel two has two members online. We will recognize the chamber first and then proceed with Ms. Sarah Cordero of International Association and Jennifer Gardner of National Confectioners Association. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Chairman Burgos, Chairman Metzger, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Aaron Riggleman, and I serve on our government affairs team at the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. We're the largest broad-based business advocacy organization in the Commonwealth, and we represent employers of all sizes and industries, including many businesses that play a direct role in Pennsylvania's food supply, from farmers and processors to distributors, grocers, and neighborhood markets. To start, I think it's worth taking a step back and recognizing the importance of this industry in our state's economy and communities. The food and agriculture industry isn't just essential, it's a pillar of our economy. It supports hundreds of thousands of jobs, drives billions in annual activity, and ensures families across the Commonwealth have access to safe, affordable food. A 2021 report put food manufacturing alone at over $22 billion in annual output. And that's not counting the ripple effect through trucking, packaging, equipment, retail, and even your local diners and restaurants. And this isn't an industry that is confined to one region either. From dairy farms in Lancaster to processors in Erie to grocery chains in Pittsburgh and Philly, it touches every corner of our Commonwealth. I'll start my testimony with a point that I think many of you know. Pennsylvania hasn't always been viewed as the easiest place to do business. We've dealt with high taxes, lengthy permitting processes, and regulatory hurdles that put us at a disadvantage to neighboring states. But I want to give credit where it's due. Over the last few years, we've seen meaningful progress, whether that be the reduction of our corporate net income tax, elimination of taxing startups, and the ongoing work to modernize permitting have sent a strong signal that Pennsylvania is serious about competing. It's critical that we keep that momentum going and that new policies don't inadvertently move us backwards, which brings me to why I'm here today. We're concerned about proposals that would create state-level mandates for food labeling, ingredients, or additives, especially when a comprehensive federal system already exists. The FDA already regulates these issues nationally, using science-based evaluations and a transparent, evidence-based process to ensure food safety and public confidence. Let me be clear. The U.S. has the safest, most reliable, and affordable food system in the world. If states opt to create unique food regulatory rules, it creates compliance headaches for manufacturers and distributors, it disrupts supply chains, and most importantly, it drives up grocery costs for Pennsylvania families at a moment when they can least afford it. And to be crystal clear one more time, our opposition is not rooted in our opposition to public health. Safety is the top priority for every food business we represent. Nobody wins if customers get sick or lose trust in products. We absolutely share the goal of keeping the food supply safe and protecting consumers. The concern is about layering conflicting or duplicative state mandates on top of federal standards and the ripple effects it can cause. Higher production and packaging costs that get passed down in part to consumers, potential shortages or reduced variety as products get pulled from some markets, consumer confusion, and at the end of the day, this is all done while no meaningful improvement in public safety outcomes is made, because the ingredients in question have already been reviewed and thoroughly vetted by the FDA using peer-reviewed science. In short, we risk creating cost and complication without delivering any new benefits. And lastly, I want to note that the current federal system works. Every food and an additive allowed on the market is reviewed for safety under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Ingredient labels already disclose this information, giving consumers the power to make informed choices. In closing, we would respectfully urge the committee to support public health by maintaining a consistent national science-based food safety system. A fragmented state-by-state patchwork of rules would only make it harder for Pennsylvania businesses to operate, increase costs for families, and create confusion in the marketplace. Let's allow the federal framework to do its job while giving businesses the room to innovate and consumers the power to choose. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and after my fellow testifiers, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Now we will hear from Ms. Sarah Cordria of International Association of Color Manufacturers. Ms. Cordria, could you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. And also, please limit your comments to 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you for the day. I apologize. My name is Sarah, and I'm here to talk about the manufacturers, IACM industry comprised of manufacturers of coloring used in food, drugs, and cosmetics, those certified and existing colors here in the States. IACM members create and use a wide variety. Given the significant impact that legislation in the use of color additives would have in the product industry in Pennsylvania, we welcome the opportunity. Color additives, medications, and do so without posing. During processing, naturally color in food is often lost, making otherwise nutritious preservation in a variety of products. Our testing research has recently shown that consumers won't purchase or consume products if the color they have is not. Color additives are therefore added to inconsistent appearance and provide visual cues of value of the product. Therefore, legislation prohibiting the use of additives in certain products or requiring products containing certain colors to contain a warning label be scientifically unfounded, result in little gain. While color additives are often considered to be members of one of two classes, a natural and synthetic color additives, the source of a color additive has no bearing on safety. Additionally, all colors matter the source among intentionally added ingredients that FDA requires they can be used in food and other FDA regulated products. As a result, colors have significant safety data. Consumers can be sure that the colors in products they consume have been subject to great oversight. Despite the proponents heard, FDA continues to monitor and relating to the safety of all colors, maintains a color master file that contains data on their safety. FDA also confirms that all estimate FD&C color additives well below the acceptable that the agency had established. In a study published by the agency, FDA has also specifically considered FD&C additives and behavioral effects in children. In 2019, FDA representatives also served on global expert committees on food additives. JACFA, the WHO FAO expert committee on food additives, completed a reevaluation of added colors in the United States, just wrapped up in 2019. So to say that these colors are safe or that FDA does not have the information, each food color authorized for Union is also subject by the European. And in Canada, by Health Canada, part of its comprehensive all food additives market, EFSA, under safety review of all authorized food, including the 9 additional synthetic colors of EFSA that are not allowed. This work was completed by EFSA in 2016. Like we did with JACFA and EFSA, eyes the formal reason colors and other food additives and encourages Pennsylvania legislators to support such a program rather than propose state-specific actions. Also, it is worth noting that every FD&C additive is not banned in Europe, approved and continue to be used worldwide, including within the European Union, as well as Canada, like I noted, Australia, New Zealand, and many others. So any differences in the U.S. and other countries are due to reasons beyond design, regulatory, or government. So to reiterate, color additives, including synthetic additives, are safely used in a variety of consumer products. They're among the most widely studied food ingredients and are strict global regulatory requirements. They've been rigorously reviewed by global health bodies, including the FDA, EFSA, and JACFA, with no safety concerns. And the color and packaged goods industry already follow the requirements of the FDA, ensure that the use of colors is consistent with good manufacturing practices and is at the lowest levels possible to provide the appropriate effect. Colors are safe and are regulated and regulated. FDA and global regulators tasked with health and will act if there are reasons. The fact that a color additive remains there is no scientific evidence to disallow its use. And U.S. regulations already require that every certified color be clearly listed on the product label by name. So if a consumer does want to avoid a product containing a color for any reason, they can already. Given the scientific colors are safe, any risk management actions by the state of Pennsylvania would be scientifically and unnecessary and not improved. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Gardner of National Confectioners Association.
Good morning, members, Chairman Metzger, and members of the. My name is Jennifer Gardner, and I'm here on behalf of the National Confectioners Association and its Pennsylvania-based. Thank you so much for the opportunity to provide remarks during discuss food supply reforms contemplated under the Healthy Package. The National Confectioners $54 billion U.S. confectionery industry. NCA represents manufacturers, suppliers of chocolate, supporting more than 58,000 direct and indirect economic activity and providing over 5.9 output in the state. Our members strongly support Pennsylvanians, and we very much applaud the food system, fresh food financing. However, prescriptive new state requirements, manufacturers that define the science-based authority of FDA would fundamentally disrupt networks. Our members must follow by federal operated by FDA. Manufacturers are currently facing with increased pressure on product pricing, tariff increase. These challenges are only compounded as states seek to new and very widely varying restrictions on food manufacturers' products. This year, 120 varying bills to address food and color additives. If each state ultimately creates its own regulatory structure with shifting requirements for ingredients, packaging, and reporting, the food manufacturing sector is irrevocably harmed. Compliance with ever-shifting states may not be feasible. State-specific disclosures for safe substances, food, and state-specific for certain food and color additives would merely create significant burdens for confectionery manufacturers without providing convenience. State legislative efforts to review and obtain food additive assessment would just create a de facto at a time when the agency is already evaluating. Just this March, HHS officials directed FDA to evaluate to enhance FDA's oversight to be grasped and bring transparency to American consumers. Notably, every grass safety standard is food additives and satisfy the conditions of its intended use. Grass substance, quantity, and quality of scientific information that would support the safety and provide a basis for grant. The FDA can best leverage regulatory experts to thoroughly analyze and assess ingredients decisions on ingredients. Similarly, FDA is positioned to oversee food labeling requirements. If Pennsylvania were to mandate food product warning labels, new states required, posing manufacturers that operate in states and seek to use uniform. Manufacturers' distribution supply chains benefit from uniform products that can be easily provided to retail locations in the country. Requiring food manufacturers to products to disclose the use of specific food or color additive also suggests FDA continues to all approved colors safe when they are used in accordance with FDA regulations, and even the California Department included in its review that there was no definitive conclusion that synthetic foods are behavioral children. Often, when food and color additives are European regulatory framework for food safety is cited as preferred to the U.S. regulatory framework due to their precautionary approach. However, it's notable that under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, 6 of the reference colors are permitted, and many colors currently approved are not allowed. Just last month, I confirmed the agency's intent to collaborate with industry and work with the National Institutes of Health's Nutrition Regulatory Science and Research Program to enhance nutrition, better inform decisions. Simultaneously, the agency announced its intent to revoke the authorization for 2 synthetic food products, citrus red number. These latest actions are revocation of both the authorization for the use of red dye 3 and brominated vegetable oil. While NCA members support a strong system and transparent product information, a patchwork of various laws require additive warnings. When FDA is already active food and color additives, it only impede, inflate costs, and undermine consumer safety of our nation's food supply. Supporters of state food FDA is not capable of making the nation's food supply safe, so states must agency actions represent this narrative. As FDA continues its work to review on behalf of all states, state proposals to create varying restrictions on ingredients merely add uncertainty to the market. In lieu of state-by-state approach, I urge you to support our national food system to maintain uniform access to safe food in every state. Thank you for your time to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from our members for the panelists? Representative Warner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. In the previous group of testifiers, I had mentioned about red dye 3. And in the testimony that we heard in the second panel, I constantly heard about federal standards. And I'm going to tell you why none of that matters to me. Because your federal standards failed. And when the federal government fails, it is the duty of the states to step in to protect their people. And that's why we're here today. The federal standards have failed. If the federal government wants to correct this, then the state of Pennsylvania will have no need to be here. This hearing would not need to be here. With the Pennsylvania Chamber of Commerce, I agree on so many issues. But as a parent of 2 children, this is one that I cannot agree on. So I will propose this question. If the federal standards work, then explain to me how red dye 3 was generally accepted in our food for the last 35 years. What is the process? How did we miss that?
I'm happy to answer, but I'll defer to Sarah with the color manufacturers. But I'll just preface, Representative Warner, we obviously appreciate your continued support on a number of issues. I think that the pretext that the federal process failed is where there is disagreement. I think that there is an opportunity to provide scientific evidence to the FDA. They've done reviews on these ingredients. In fact, there is an advocate for the people on the other side of this issue in that position right now. And yet he himself has yet to ban these 8 ingredients. So I think that the question that needs to be asked is, if the science is available to ban these, to show the conflict or show the health issues that they cause, I think that I would call on RFK to look at that. And he's in a position that with a stroke of a pen, he could make that change, and he hasn't done so yet. So I'll defer to Sarah to supplement those comments. But
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, I mean, that is that, you know, as it's known globally, is still approved for use in pretty much any other country besides the US.
Stop you right there. So you're saying that it's safe in the that you disagree with the FDA standards then?
The FDA did not.
Okay, so but they just banned it. Am I incorrect? It's banned.
They did prohibit it and called the Delaney clause, yeah.
Okay, would you like to explain that to me? Because I do not know about that clause.
Sure. The Delaney clause in our statute, the Act in the United States, says that if there any study anywhere and that shows any amount of any additive cause have carcinogenic effects in humans or animals, that it is not allowed for use. It's a stricter safety standard than any other country has.
And did red dye 3, in my understanding, it did prove to cause cancer in rats? Is that correct?
Correct. So
Okay.
in 1980, one study that showed given to male rats at a level way higher than there was a thyroid effect, and that effect is not even applicable. But yes, that was the study that actually an industry study, and that's why it was never aesthetics. It's not correct to say
Okay, so I will just say this, and I stated it earlier. As a layperson, I could tell my child, 11-year-old child, I would say, Ben, the government says this is no good for you to put on your skin. Okay, since 1990, no good. All right, very bad for you if you put this on your skin, right? Well, here's a piece of toast with that on it. Do you want to eat it? He'd go, no. But our government said it was okay for the last 35 years. Again, if we've banned something to put on our skin since 1990, said we can't eat it, and now magically it's banned, you have the system's broken then. You have a completely broken system is what I'm trying to say. And I have to be honest with you, because of that, I have no trust in it. Regardless of what clause you may mention, when something has been banned to be put on your skin for that long, yet we've consumed it and now it's illegal, okay? Now it's illegal. And if there wasn't an issue with it, it wouldn't be illegal. It doesn't matter what the documentation is. If there's no harm for it, then make it legal then. Why would it be illegal just for the sake of being illegal? That's what I don't understand here. Okay. Well,
And I have no eating any synthetic dyes. And I will also just note that I probably move on, but there are many colors that approved for use in cosmetics that have never been, including some that are approved.
and that's where I'm saying I have no faith in our system, because I have no idea what dyes are good for me or not, because for the last how many years a population, myself, have consumed this dye that I was told was safe by the government, but now is not. And I'll just be frank, I don't want my children eating any food that would cause cancer and excuse me, I don't want my children to eat any food that would cause cancer in rats. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You can do so by reading the label.
Additional questions? Ms. Sarah, why are products made with different ingredients in different countries?
Hi, I'm sorry, I didn't catch the name, but thank you for the question. I mean, I can only speak color additives, but every system and every country asks for a little bit different information and decide what additives. It's pretty similar, but the other thing I'll note is that there are certain ingredients that have never been certain countries for various reasons. An example of colors, there are many more approved in Europe, and that's honestly because bar for getting a color high costs a lot of money, a lot of resources, a lot of time, that it's something that is required for you. The manufacturer has to determine whether worth the time and resources to do that, and in cases it never petitioned the agency in the United States, for example, to approve a color here that's approved, and vice versa. Preferences, needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Mihalik?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been a supporter of businesses, not only in my district, but around the Commonwealth. So it's really concerning to hear from the business community that we have a comprehensive system, that it's a transparent system, that it's going to create compliance headaches when we've very clearly heard the health outcomes and the negative health effects from all of these things that we are repeatedly bombarded with that are marketed to our children. I do have a couple of specific questions, one having to do with colors and one having to do with some of the remarks made regarding the generally recognized as safe process. And one of those remarks was that it creates, I think it was said, a de facto parallel FDA, when in fact we're asking for the information. If you've determined by your company, your food manufacturer, and you're saying something's generally recognized as safe, we're just asking to provide us with that data. Why would consumers not be allowed to see the very same information that you use to make that self-determination that this is safe? And I don't know who wants to take that, but my question regarding the coloring, it was said again and again, there's this rigorous FDA process, is expensive, it takes a long time, and you have to have this approval of the color additive prior to it coming to market. So with these additives that we're looking at here in Pennsylvania that have been looked at across the nation, and several other states have already taken steps to ban them, when were those colors approved? Like, how old is the research? So my first question is regarding the generally recognized as safe process, and then I think for the International Association of Color Manufacturers.
Well, I'm happy to start on the GRAS and let my co-testifiers supplement, but I think your question is in relation to a piece of your package that House Bill 1130, where you want the Department of Agriculture to essentially create a database. There's several key issues with that proposal specifically. Well, let me preface this by, we're concerned about any state-by-state food regulatory mandates and patchwork systems, but to speak specifically to your concerns with 1130, there's no timeline for the Department of Agriculture to list or approve a submitted GRAS substance to them.
But do you agree the data should be available to the public, to the consumers who are going to be eating this stuff? Why hide the data? That's all the bill asks to do, is to just show the data.
Well, I think I would reject the premise that consumers don't have data available to them already.
We don't have the industry-funded data that made that determination in the first place.
Well, there's proprietary information concerns with that. I don't think that just submitting this information and making it publicly available to the consumers, making it available to consumers is already done. Making that proprietary information available or forcing industry to do that is going to stymie innovation, it's going to raise costs, and quite frankly, as part of this bill, it's going to take items from the shelf because there's no timeline for these to be listed on this database that's being created. So it's creating a tremendous amount of uncertainty. And by the way, businesses are going to pay to keep this database up and running with no cap and can be changed on a year-to-year basis. So there's a lot of fundamental issues with this bill, none of which, there's a continued concern about making patchwork systems because we're putting ourselves at a disadvantage when other states and other industries in other states do not have to comply with these duplicative standards.
But we're trying to protect the Pennsylvania consumer who does not have access to that information. When it is a GRAS determination, the company's not even required. It's a voluntary disclosure to the FDA. It's completely voluntary. So it's like, hey, the scientist that we paid said this thing that we invented is cool, and then it goes to market, and then it can never get off. It might sit there for 35 years. So we're asking for transparency, but I know we're short on time, so I do want to move to that approval process on not the chemicals, but the color additives. So they went through this rigorous process, they're approved, we've heard they're just unequivocally safe. When was that approval done?
Hi, Representative. I don't think that unequivocally safe. The initial the FDA done in response to color additive amendment 60, so they happened primarily between 80. However, those are getting food additives that the FDA approved. There's an initial approval.
But there's no post-market review of those additives.
Yep. Here in the United States, evaluation process. We are supportive of a formal reevaluation process because it would go a long way to making consumers more confident in the colors that are being used in products.
So the colors we're talking about, they went through this process, they were approved maybe as late as the 1980s, but I'm looking at Blue 1, the FDA hasn't taken a look at since 1969, Yellow 6, 1986, Yellow 5, 1969. So we're talking about research that's much older than anybody in this room, and we know that science is constantly evolving. There are toxicology tests that it can be done today that were not going to be conducted in the 70s because the science wasn't available. So we say, yes, it was approved. It went through this rigorous process in 1969. So I think this has, because of this and the various other factors, there's a lack of will to be transparent. And then there's this washing over of the facts. Yes, it did a pre-approval process, but it was 60 years ago. It's time that we update this information, and it's time that we be honest with the consumers and the people that are ingesting this, the people that are feeding it to their kids, and that's all of us. This is an issue that touches all of us, so I thank you for your time.
Rep.
I correct very much. I can respond to that. Thank you. I also am a mother, and I just want to make sure everyone understands that colors have not been looked at since the 70s or 80s. As I noted, as we evaluated them in the past 20 years, I see that process. For any outstanding questions the safety authority raised about any of the colors, data gap that they felt.
Don't the European Union nations require warning labels for all these colors, don't they?
That data gap would be, and we did a study to fill that data gap, and we published it in the peer review, and we provided it to the So it's just simply untrue that have not been. I just want to make that aware.
Can I make one point, Chairman? This is in my testimony, not directly related to your question, but I want to make it clear that industry is supportive of additional funding to the FDA for their workforce to make government more efficient. It helps consumers, it helps the review process, it helps businesses to be able to bring products to market quicker when the process is more efficient. And so if there's interest here in urging the federal government to fund the FDA fully, we would be supportive of that. And I think that is a consensus approach that we can take as industry, as advocates, together to make the process more efficient for
And unfortunately, Aaron, we don't have any control over that. The FDA, up until recently, had the same number of employees as it did in 1978. Now they have even fewer. So the reality is these approval process, if there's going to be a post-market review process that comes into play, they lack the resources to do anything about it. And that's just plain and simple. And that's why it's imperative that the states are taking up these issues, because the federal government has failed in this realm.
Representative Haddock.
I have to tell a private story. I went to visit my mother-in-law in a nursing home the other night, and she was watching The Twilight Zone, and I would really think that I'm really sitting here and saying, I'm in the Twilight Zone. We have business testifying, follow the science of the FDA, and I have friends on the other side of the aisle very passionate about creating new regulations in the state of Pennsylvania. I just think that's an interesting twist of what we normally hear. But we know, and we talked about red dye, and that's just one substance. There has been many that were detrimental to the health of the consumers. And our job is the backstop of the federal government to step in and do what's right for our constituents. So I applaud their advocacy and their beliefs. And then to hear the chamber say, really, I don't know if you caught your words, but I was sitting here and I hear that you weren't concerned about the health because you were worried about the money. That was one of the lines here that I really...
I never said we care about the money. I said very specifically that I wanted to be clear that our opposition is not related to public health. We care about public health. It's the #1 priority for our members. I never, ever uttered the words that profit comes before the safety. In fact, I articulated both in my written testimony and in my verbal remarks that is the opposite is the case. So I want to correct the record and make it abundantly clear that verbatim in my testimony is clarity that safety is our priority.
By the way, it was when you answered a question, not in your testimony, but that's okay. That's all right. It's what you said and the way I personally interpret it.
Any additional questions from members? Hearing none, we would like to recognize letters received by the committee for the record. From Health Freedom Pennsylvania, Center for Science and Public Interest, Pennsylvania Coalition for Informed Choice, coalition groups of Feingold Association, Stand for Health Freedom, Families Advocating for Chemical and Toxic Safety, National Consumers League, Consumers Federation of America, Consumer Reports, Center for Food Safety, Center for Environmental Health, Food and Water Watch, Pennsylvania Farm Bureau, and the Pennsylvania Food Merchants Association. Hearing no questions before the committee, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you to all the panelists.